He's an artist, a photographer, and one heck of a saxophone player. Dickie Landry visits Wyoming on the next Wyoming Chronicle.
Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Cecilia, Louisiana-born artist, composer, musician, and photographer Dickie Landry spent his formative and creative years in New York City during the 1970s. Landry visited Wyoming this fall, and his work is on display at the University of Wyoming's Art Museum until Saturday, December 19th. It explores the innovations in visual art, performance art, and music in 1970s New York through Landry's drawings, photographs, and paintings. It was a time of an evolving avant-garde scene as artists, musicians, composers, dancers, and performance artists rebelled against the accepted traditions and sought new ways of creative expression. Landry's work was brought to Wyoming through UW's Museum as a Classroom approach, where the UW Art Museum presents and collects world-class art that furthers programs that engage students and visitors in discussions that broaden an understanding of diverse perspectives, viewpoints, and cultures, and advances service to the state. Dickie Landry, his work is on display at the University of Wyoming Art Museum now through mid-December. And Dickie, you're an artist, a composer, a musician, a painter, a photographer, a farmer, and I don't think that we have enough time to list all of the things that you do. Welcome to Wyoming Chronicle.
Thank you. You miss cotton picker and pecan picker.
Well, a pecan farmer today, for sure.
Farmer, yes.
And we'll certainly talk about that. Dickie, what brings you to Wyoming? You have such a diverse past. Why are you here in Wyoming today?
I'm here because of the director of the University Art Museum in Laramie, Susan Moldenhauer. I met her in Carbondale, Colorado, 2.5 years ago. I had a Sir James Searles art party. And I had to do a concert, and then the next day I was doing a performance. I was playing in James' studio, which had a great sound. And Susan gave her the idea that I should come to Laramie. So that's how it started.
Let's wind back to the beginning. A lot of our viewers may not know who you are. This is your first visit to Wyoming.
Right.
You grew up in Louisiana.
Cecilia, Louisiana, a small town of about 200 people. 200, very small town.
And early on, what did you do?
Well, at the age of 6, my mother brought me to the Catholic Church to either be the next pope, a cardinal, priest, better yet, altar boy. And I had 4 girl cousins, first cousins, and we always had fun, and I knew what girls were. And when she introduced me to the priest, I looked at him and going like, I don't know. And the choir was practicing, and I turned around, and it was all girls, so I'm going like, I think I want to do that. So my mother said that would make you happy, go and do that. So I sang Gregorian chant from the age of 6 to 13. I started playing saxophone in the 5th grade, 10 years old. My brother, 8 years older than I am, he went off to join the Air Force for the Korean War and left me a saxophone. So I figured if he could do it, I could do it. And that's how it all began.
Your dad was gone for a good portion of your childhood, and he returned when you were 12 or 13.
My father was busy building sugarcane refineries in Central and South America, and he also helped build the Panama Canal, which he took too much quinine and lost his hearing. He came back to Louisiana when I was 13 years old and decided he was going to open up a dairy. And I was excited. Dad's back home, blah, like, yay. Well, a few months later, I realized that we had to milk the cows twice a day, and I wasn't too happy about it. But anyway, one day I was shoveling the manure around, and I remember putting the handle of the shovel under my chin and going like, there's got to be something better than this. And I mean, that's how it all began.
Your brother was a big influence in your early musical life.
He was, and still is in a way. You know, you know, I still respect him. He's still playing. He's 84 years old, still playing saxophone.
So you not only have you played saxophone, you played other instruments as well.
I started on the saxophone, and before, I mean, to go to the university, there was no saxophone teachers or flute teachers, so I had to learn how to play the clarinet. And fortunately, I had a band director that had a summer camp at the senior high school in Lafayette. So my brother would drop me off there in the mornings, and I would hitchhike back to Cecilia, which is about a 20-minute drive. Well, maybe a half-hour drive. This man, John Gilfrey, was the son of a circus musician, and he knew how to play every instrument in the band. And I did this for 2 summers in a row, and I evidently was good, because the end of the second summer, he said, "I'm going to be the band director at the university next year, and you're going to be my first chair player." I'm going like, you know, okay. And
Is that what you wanted to do at the time?
I wanted to play music. I didn't particularly like the clarinet, but my passion was music, and you know, it's something to do. I wasn't playing in any bands at the time, except my brother's band, like Society Band. My first job was at 13. I got paid $10, and for 4 hours of work, and I thought that I was, you know, working in the fields for $2 a day, $3 a day, and 4 hours playing music I was rich.
So you were still in Louisiana. You're going to college at the University of Louisiana Lafayette.
Right.
And you ended up being a music instructor for a little while.
I graduated and taught school for 2 years in a very small school. I saw the kindergarten. I saw the entire school every day, kindergarten through high school. The great joy was teaching beginning band, because you had to teach all these kids how to blow the instruments and stuff. And I'll never forget, okay, we're going to play the first note now. Everybody, when my hands come down, y'all play the first note. It was total cacophony. I don't think any musician or any orchestra in the world could recreate that sound. It was like scratching the board, you know. Like. And then, yeah, I had fun doing it. But I was playing 4 nights a week. I was teaching and also taking classes. I was quite busy.
You were continuing to learn. You were noticing that Louisiana may not be for you in the long term. Well, you ended up in New York City.
My first trip to New York City was right out of high school. My brother and his friend, they were Korean vets going to school in GI Bill. And my brother and his friend were up in New York City, Columbia, getting their master's degree. And the friend befriended this guy who was a jazz drummer. And his family had just struck oil and gas on his property. He had money, so he bought a 1956 Corvette, red and white Corvette, and approached me and said, let's drive to New York City and see your brother and my friend. So we jumped in the Corvette, and no interstates in those days.
Now, this is before the internet.
Oh.
And you're a small town young man from Louisiana.
I didn't get a telephone until I was a freshman in college. When I first heard my father's voice on the phone, I'm going like, who is this? He says, your father, asshole.
What were you thinking? You're going to New York City to do what?
My brother would send jazz records from, he was in an Air Force band, and he was playing jazz, and he was sending me jazz records. You know, Chet Baker, the West Coast, basically the West Coast jazz musicians. Jerry Mulligan, Shorty Rogers, those Chet Baker. And I became very interested in jazz. So the object was to go visit my friends, but also hear some jazz. So we drove straight to New York City, drove straight to Birdland, parked about 2 blocks away. It was, in those days, a little easier than it is today. I'm totally zoot-suited out. I mean, peg pants, long coat, you know, after the light green coat suit. He's 27, I'm 17. I walk right in and they card him. And I got to hear Miles Davis, Bud Powell, Philly Joe Jones, and a host of other great jazz musicians. And that was a spark, you know, to get me back.
So how long did you stay your first time around? First time
2 weeks,
Mhm.
and went to a different club every night. It was fantastic.
You come back to Louisiana. You're in school, but still getting back to New York is on your mind.
Getting back to New York is on my mind. I actually, once I graduated on the studied clarinet, I really wanted to learn how to play the flute. So I got a name of a flute teacher in New York City by the name of Arthur Laura. And I wrote him a letter, and nice letter back, come on up. I didn't know who he was, he didn't know who I was. So I took the Greyhound bus and arrived and went 15 minutes early to the lesson, and I heard somebody practicing, and I heard a flute player. So he opens the door and he says, "Oh, how long have you been standing here?" I said, 15 minutes. I said, "What? I heard you practicing." He said, "Well, I don't practice anymore." I said, "So what were you doing?" He said, "I was warming up because I didn't know who was coming. If you might play better than I could."
Mm-hmm.
He could. Anyway, so he asked me, the first question was, "Why do you want to learn how to play the flute? Do you want to go to Juilliard, soloist, or an orchestra?" I said, "I just want to learn it." To cut a long story short, he said, "Take one note at a time." And I'm thinking, I'm there for 6 weeks, and 6 notes, I'm not going to make it. Meantime, I was staying with a friend up in Yonkers, above Manhattan, in a house, and that house relates to the story. I come back the first lesson, and I've been practicing 15, 16 hours a day for the first week, and he said, "Great progress." I said, 6 notes wouldn't cut it. So anyway, the third lesson, he says, "You have no idea who I am." I said, "Mr. Laura, no." He says, "I was Arturo Toscanini's principal flute player for 15 years, which is a major thing." So those lessons with Mr. Laura got me ready for the Philip Glass Ensemble years later.
You come to New York, you're trying to make it as a musician. You also need to take up photography to survive.
Well, I was plumbing with Philip Glass, and through him I met a young performance artist on the street one afternoon, and she invited me to a performance, her first performance. So I went. I borrowed a friend's camera, he put the film in, set the speed, ASA and all that.
Did you have a background in photography at the time?
None. No. I had experience with 35 millimeter film, because when I was 14, a friend of my best friend's father built a movie theater, and I eventually became the projectionist. So I was always looking at, dealing with 35 millimeter film. But handling a camera, no. So I went to the performance. I took photographs, and the next morning she called and she says, "Oh, I saw you there with a camera. So do you want to sell some of your photographs?" And I'm thinking, plumbing, photography. So that's how I got into photography. And then I started meeting all the artists, friends of Philip and a couple other artists, and started working with them personally and helping build their pieces or conceptualizing their pieces and doing video work with them.
Video was new at the time?
Pardon?
Video was relatively new at the time?
Brand new at the time, because with film you shoot 10-minute roll, you got to get it processed in 3 or 4 days. You might have something, you might not have something. Video was quick, instant edit, being able to edit right immediately during the process. Yeah, it was fun.
Are you performing music at the time?
Yeah, we were performing with the Philip Glass Ensemble.
And where were you playing?
Mostly museums and art galleries. The music world didn't accept Philip till after Einstein on the Beach in '76. So from '69, basically, we toured Europe and America, museums and art galleries. And while we were on tour, I would stay an extra month and do my solo work, or go before him, whatever.
So as you were continuing to progress musically, what was the major influence? What kind of musician were you becoming? People have maybe said you are a jazz musician. You don't classify yourself as a jazz musician.
I never classified myself as a jazz musician. I got the concept, but the way my mind works, with music is not very constructed, like constructive music doesn't work for me. I like the free improvisation. In other words, most of the time, I got a bunch of musicians in New Orleans. They come and record. I'm going like, I don't do songs. Oh no, we're just going to start playing. I'm going like, I'm coming.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But majority of the time with me, it works.
So how long did you remain in New York City?
Off and on for about 30 years. I left after 9/11, basically.
Where were you at 9/11?
I was in Lafayette. I was supposed to have been in New York City that morning, but in those days you could change planes, you could change your ticket. You could walk out of a plane and go to the desk and go, I don't want to take this plane, I want to take the next one. You could do that in those days. But and I kind of felt guilty for the first couple of days, 3 days that I wasn't there, because I maybe could have done something. And I finally realized I would have ran just like everybody else, you know. Because I was directly across the street from the South Tower.
It must have impacted you like it did everyone in the country.
Oh, it was traumatic because for 24 years I used to go around underneath or through the towers to get to my apartment, you know. Great story is that there was one bar called the Odeon, which is about 7 blocks from the apartment. That was the last stop on the way home, and by that time all my friends in there, we'd drink to the wee hours, and I'd walk in 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, they're buffing the floors. Hey, Landry, come and help us buff the floors, and I'd squirrel around with the machines and stuff, yeah.
So back to Louisiana. You are there, you still live there today?
In Lafayette, and I go to my farm every day and work.
And you have a pecan farm?
Pecan, about 600-700 trees. And no pecans this year, not one. But I still have to clean it up. You have to understand, in Louisiana in wintertime, the countryside looks flat like this floor, but by August, September, the weeds are above your head on the tractor.
Do you enjoy that? It seems to me it's just so diverse from performing, from composing. You know Paul Simon, you performed with Bob Dylan. Being a pecan farmer, where does that fit into your enjoyment of life?
It's my property. It's I get my best thoughts running around in circles. A lot of the times I forget about it, but the good ones stick, and you know, I go home and think about it, or take out the horn, or go into the studio and come up with something.
Let's talk about Paul Simon and Bob Dylan for just a minute.
Okay.
It's a part of your life. How did you meet Paul Simon?
I met him at the Carnegie Hall recital hall at a Cajun music concert, and everybody said I should meet him, and I said, well, he doesn't need to meet another person. So I remember walking up the stairs to go get a drink, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, he knows Philip Glass, he knows Laurie Anderson, go say hello. So I went and said hello, and I mentioned those names. He said, oh, it's good credentials. So I asked him out, I said, how'd you like the music? He said, it's okay.
That's what you told Paul Simon?
Yeah.
Okay. And
I said, well, have you heard the black music of Louisiana? And he said, you mean like Clifton Chenier? I said, yes. And he said, well, I'm working on a project right now that I want to use Clifton. And I mentioned that Clifton was in the hospital, was sick, and had been there for a while. And he said, well, what do you suggest? I said, well, there's another Zydeco band playing tonight at a bar called Tramps. So he said, well, I want to go listen to him. If I like that, I'll call you in the morning. So I said, call me early, because I had working with somebody. He called me at 7 in the morning. He says, find me 2 more bands and find me a studio. In the meantime, come to the studio tonight, and I want to let you hear what I'm doing. So arrived at the studio, and introduced me to his engineer, who had been with him since he was 15 years old, Roy Haley. And he sits me down, and he's singing in my ear this close. Tape is rolling, and tape stops, and what do you think? I said, well, Paul, I have a confession to make. I've never bought one of your records. I respect you as a composer, songwriter, guitar player, singer, but, oh, he said, that's okay, don't worry. Well, what else? I said, well, this is not Memorex. All I could think about the whole time is that Paul Simon singing in my ear, Simon singing in my ear. He said, oh, same thing happened to me when Dylan sang in my ear. So all I could think was, oh, Bob Dylan singing in my ear. He said, there, you'll get over it. So the tape runs again and stops, and he says, what do you think? I said, well, music sounds great, the band's wonderful, the arrangements, the musicians are fantastic. And he gives me this, like, what about the lyrics? And I said, Paul, I'm a musician, I think of music this way, not, and I couldn't sing you Silent Night without making a mistake. He said, well, that's why I brought you. I want a credit on the words. I said, well, give me a piece of paper. So I tape rolls again. He's still right there. I'm writing. I give him the piece of paper. He looks at it, folds it up. So I figured it's like, okay, out, let's go. So we get in his limo and we go to a nice Italian restaurant and have a bottle of wine and good food. And he takes out the paper and he says, "You're the first person in a long time to tell me what I want to know. Everybody tells me it sounds great, Paul. Sounds great, Paul." So he came to Louisiana and eventually put the song "That Was Your Mother," standing on the corner in Lafayette, on the Graceland. And he kept telling me that, if this, he's used to million sellers, right? And the last record he had done only sold 250,000 copies. So he was thinking that his career was over. And like a black musician friend of mine in Louisiana would say, I didn't want to jinx it. So I kept telling him it sounded great. So I come back to Louisiana, and a few weeks later I get a phone call about 4 o'clock in the morning, and it's Paul, and he goes like, "Oh God, I can't sing, Dickie. I can't. My singing, the bands, the music, I can't. Something's wrong." And he went on about just complaining, and I said, "Well, what'd you do today?" He said, "Oh, I turned the master in." I said, "Oh, you have nothing to do tomorrow." Because he had been working on it daily for 2.5 years. So it's post-depression stuff. And then it's a long silence, and he finally says, "That's why I like you, because I like to talk to you, because you always know what to say, when to say it."
Let's talk about your art. We've talked a lot about your music. Your art, again, is on display at the University of Wyoming Art Museum through mid to late December. What influences you in your art?
Well, the reason why I'm sitting here today and having art on the wall is because of Robert Rauschenberg, American artist, who I was graduating from high school and didn't know what I wanted to be, as either jazz musician, classical artist. And, the fight when you're 17 years old, you have no idea what you want to be. And I would go to the library often and look at Time magazine, and there's always articles on art, and flip the page one day, and this artist had painted his bed and put it on the wall, and I said to myself, if he gets national recognition of this, I'm free to do whatever I want to do. And this is 1956, and I met him in 1969, never thinking I'd ever get to meet the man, and eventually ended up touring the world with him, playing for his openings. And getting to New York and wanting to be in the art world, not really the music world, was a great influence.
A lot of your art is based, to me, on a cube, or on something that looks like an old-time television. Is that what it is?
Well, the idea came from the old TV had a rounded bottom, rounded top, and I just squared off the thing. And there's a young woman that did a master's paper on my show, and she came up with the meaning of what the painting represented, axonometric. And I had to like Google it to find out what
your own paintings meant.
But my mother was 98 years old, and I was having a show, and Dickie, you're painting? I said, yeah. She said, well, I want to see him. So I brought him out, and she rolled in with her wheelchair, and she goes, oh, it's the cube. She got it immediately.
From now on, Dickie, what's the focus of your life going to be, or do you know?
Oh, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I fight to stay alive every day. It's just one step at a time. I got a painting show, like I said. I'm getting ready for that. I need to go in the studio and do some work.
Still going to be a pecan farmer?
I've got to go and clean up at the acre. I got to cut it all once again. There's a lot of wood on the ground, which I chainsaw and then I split. And I love to cook. I love to go hear zydeco music and different music. There's a lot of music in Louisiana. I love to dance. So yeah, one step at a time, and hopefully I can outlive my mother.
Dickie Landry, your show NYC 1969 through 1979 is at the University of Wyoming through mid-December.
Mid-December.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, sir.
For joining us on Wyoming Chronicle.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.